He has spoken on the topics faith, family and freedom in Cuba, Belgium, Brazil, Congo, UK and all over the USA to crowds from 14 to 40,000. International leadership speaker, trainer and coach. Author of Learn to Raw Leadership, Attitude Hack, Live a More Excellent Life, 5 Battle Strategies of a Victorious Warrior. 2021 President's Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Founding partner of the John Maxwell team. Toastmaster International Speech Competition semi-finalist. Founder of Tell It Like It Is TV, ThatGuyRocks.com and ThatGuySpeaks.com. Creator of Story Power TV, Transforming Grace TV, and Leading Leaders Podcast. Producer of 4 TV programs and podcasts for Liftable TV and World Trumpet Television as well as multiple social media channels. Please help me welcome J Loren Norris.
I have a friend that we've been doing business and ministry together almost 30 years now. And he called me the day, about a week ago, not quite a week ago, and he said, hey, I've made this new discovery and you really need to get on board with this. You got to check this out. And then he told me, if you don't get on board with this, chances are this new discovery is going to make you obsolete. That's a pretty bold statement, but it's a risk we all run. And so my question to you, and I really want you to ponder this, I'd love you to throw some comments in if you have some thoughts on it. What can a leader do? I'd love you to throw some comments in if you have some thoughts on it. What can a leader do to make themselves indispensable? I want to challenge you with some ideas on that in this episode of Leading Leaders. Join in the conversation with me.
Subscribe now for our extensive video library of leadership lessons promoting faith, family, and freedom.
I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast. And, in the days of the newspaper, they thought, well, you got the newspaper now, you got this ability to print and move news really, really fast and in a local area or a national area or even globally. And then telegrams and telegraphs. And we went from horses riding across the country with news. I mean, can you imagine the Pony Express compared with satellite or FaceTime? I mean, it seems ludicrous to think, but we still have, believe it or not, various forms of message delivery that require that someone travel from point A to point B personally. I know this because even with the days of all of the advents that we have with Dropbox and Google, et cetera, I remember driving 2 hours round trip when I was a cab driver. They would give me these big cans of film that had to go from one television network studio to another, and they would load up the back of my taxi cab with them, and I would drive from one city to another for a 4-hour round trip to deliver these film canisters because there was no other way they could get there. And UPS and FedEx and all these other companies that are responsible for freight transfer. There's only a limited capacity of them. Of course, now you have Amazon and you have Uber drivers, and the list goes on and on of different people who get behind the wheel of a car and they go from point A to point B to deliver everything from office supplies to food to people. But what if all of those are replaced by cars that drive themselves? What then will those drivers do to make themselves valuable to society in such a way as to earn a wage? Because without the wage, you can't buy food, and without the wage, you can't pay rent, and without the wage, you can't get your hair cut. Because all of these other services that make your life livable, they require a wage, some sort of earning. In fact, you may or may not know it, but as of midnight last night, the dock workers all over the United States are striking, because the average income being somewhere between $160,000 and $200,000 in their industry. And I understand that's average, so there are a lot of people that don't make that, and some people that make way more than that, but that's the average. That's apparently not enough to live on in the areas that they live. And I get that. I mean, I know my boys have had a real hard time in their early 20s trying to just pay rent, because there are places where paying rent is $2,000 a month. And it's hard to make $2,000 a month as 60% of your disposable income in today's wages, even at $15 an hour. But in places where the minimum wage is not $15 an hour, it's really hard to pay $2,000 a month and still pay a car payment, or keep your own car on the road if you've already paid it off. It's a hard way to live. But the bigger fear, from what I understand, and I haven't read the documents myself, I'm counting on third-party resources, but from what I understand, it's not just we want more money. It's we want more money and a 70% pay increase on top of, and we want the guarantee that we will never become obsolete. No robots in our jobs. No automatons doing the work that we humans ought to do, because we want to be able to always have the right to earn. That's a reasonable request. See, when my friend called me the other day, he said, you're about to become obsolete, because I can tell my AI to create the same kind of video you do every day. In fact, it can mimic your voice. It can mimic what you teach. It can mimic what you know. I don't question that at all. I also know that when the telegraph came along, there were people who were terrified that Pony Express would become obsolete and there would never be another reason to carry objects from point 1 to point 2, or point A to point B, or point A to point Z. I also know that when the cell phone came along, the long distance went away, they found other ways to charge you. Yeah. I also know that when the telephone came along, we thought, well, we won't need the radio, we won't need the telegraph. When the radio came along, we won't need the newspaper. When the television came along, we thought, well, we won't need the radio anymore. When the television and the radio were both going strong, and then the internet came along, we thought, well, that's going to do away with the television and the radio. And last I looked, most people have a radio in their car, a television in their home, internet in their pocket, and at their desk, and at their home. And some people get their television viewing content through the internet on their TV on the wall at home. Go figure. It's funny that those things have all integrated together. In fact, it's funny that even the new AI, the threats, the fears, the warnings of obsolescence, really, they're tools that have made things more efficient. Having a calculator. This was part of the conversation I had with my friend. I said, I have an uncle. He's gone now, but when my uncle was around, he could take a slide rule and do calculated problems that are mind-boggling. The kind of stuff that I studied in electronics engineering that looked more like calculus and trigonometry, these very complicated to solve problems. And he could solve many of them with his slide rule faster than I could type them into my calculator. Now, the calculator is a fascinating tool, and when they put stuff in the intelligence of the calculator, like cosine, and you didn't have to know what the mechanism was or the process was to get to cosine, you could just type in a number and hit the cosine button, and it did all the calculations for you in the background. That became very, very helpful. But when you can figure that out on a slide rule, which one's obsolete? Because today, most people wouldn't be able to identify a slide rule. It's kind of like those silly little memes you see when you see 3 different clutch pedals underneath, or 3 different pedals underneath in a car, and you're like, well, that's the gas, I know that one, and that's the brake, I know that one. And then there's that third one over there, and I guess that's for the stick shift. And then there's a fourth one. A what? A fourth one? What are you going to do with 4 of them? You only have 2 feet. Well, that's the parking brake in an older car. And imagine yourself, because I watched it happen in the UK, when you rolled up on a stoplight or a stop sign on a hill in a manual transmission, and your parking brake wasn't at your hand, It was the fourth pedal. How do you operate that? How do you hold the steering wheel, manage the gear shift, release the brake, push the emergency brake to set still at the hill, and how do you manage all that? Because I know a lot of them were taught to use a handbrake. Pull the handbrake up, you keep the clutch in and one foot on the brake, and when you need to go, you put your foot off the brake and on the gas, and you slowly release the handbrake, and that's how you get up a hill. All of that became obsolete with the advent of the automatic transmission. Well, no, there are a lot of people that still use that, but the knowledge of how to use those older tools, a lot of that knowledge is completely lost. You ever ask yourself the question, maybe you don't watch the same weird documentaries that I do, but I remember watching one called Ancient Aliens. Then the question that was asked was, Machu Picchu, I think is the name of the mountain in South America with the big giant monolith stones on it. And they took an engineer down there and they said, you see that rock? And he said, yeah, that's a big rock. And they said, so what we know about that rock is it's not natural here. He was like, well, that's fascinating. They said that the estimated weight of that rock based on the density of it per square inch when we shave things off of it is about 200 tons. He said, yeah, that's pretty impressive. They said, if we told you that that rock came from roughly 1,000 miles from here, how would you get a 200-ton rock that big to that spot? And he said, I need to do some thinking on that. And he came back with an estimate of about $20 billion in transportation costs, because there's nothing currently that flies in 2024. There's nothing that flies that can latch onto something that weighs 200 tons and transport it 1,000 miles. It's just not there. So the next option would be, well, you're going to have to put it on a truck or a train and move it from one place to another. But since there's not a railroad in the space where you're at, or a road in the space where you're at, you're going to have to build a road. Oh, and by the way, something that big weighing that much weight, you're going to have like a whole convoy of wide load trucks working together in unison, which means the road that you're going to build has to be able to support about 500 tons between the weight of the vehicles and the weight of the rock to be able to move it from one place to another. And so, yeah, it's going to cost you several hundreds of billions of dollars to move that rock from where it's at 1,000 miles away. How did it get there? See, there's this concept of lost knowledge because we invent these tools that do the work for us. We find this way to get something accomplished without having to go to all the thoughts to do it. I know there are people who have tools in their kitchen, tools in their garage, tools that maybe they've inherited, that they don't know today how to use them to accomplish what they were invented for. Because there's another tool that does that plus, something else. The idea of a leader becoming obsolete really, in my opinion, is about knowledge. It's about understanding the way that things are and the way that things were and the way that things ought to be or could be or should be or can be. And understanding that there's a future possibility and a future opportunity, that's key. AI is a very powerful tool. The challenge that I have with AI is that it's not like my hammer or my axe or even my calculator. AI has been embedded in my phone, but my phone as a phone didn't need it. It does other things now. But ask yourself this. How many people's phone numbers could you remember if you were my age? How many people's phone numbers could you remember when you were in high school? Probably 24. And it was easy because in my small hometown, everybody's first 10 phone numbers, the first 6 of 10 were always the same. Same area code, same prefix. You just had to remember the last 4. And to dial them, we honestly, in my tiny little hometown back in the day, we only had to dial 5 digits. The last one of the prefix and the 4 of their actual phone number. My mother was 6276 forever, ever. That was easy to remember. Because 66276, that was the prefix and the phone number. That was it. That's easy to remember. I can remember dozens of them. Today, I have to think to remember my children's phone numbers. And honestly, they change them so often. I think I can remember one of them. No, I'm not going to tell you. I can remember one of their phone numbers because it hasn't changed since we bought the line when they were a teenager. The other ones have rotated through several other phone numbers, so I get notifications from time to time from them. Here's my new phone number, Dad. Save it in your phone. Make sure. But when I look back at their name, there's like 9 different new number. So now I've had to start putting the date on them because they change so often. And they're 10-digit numbers. And I have 4 kids, so now there's like 60 little entries into my phone of all their different phone numbers. But back in the day, it was a big fat phone book. Or it was what you remembered in your head. Or it's a couple of pieces of paper in your business card. Well, now we have AI in the phone for that purpose. Well, what else does AI do for you? I have a friend named Larry Roberts. He travels around the world in the podcast arena, teaching people how to use AI for the creation of their content. He also teaches them how to build a podcast that's going to be profitable. Maybe I should take all of his lessons and apply them to this podcast because I've been doing it now for almost 10 years for free. And there's a reason that I do it for free. We could get into that later, but the idea that AI can create your content, I get it. And I also understand that AI can do it faster than I can do it. And I understand that AI can beat all the algorithms. And it knows what Meta wants. And it knows what YouTube wants. And it knows what Instagram wants. And if you let AI do all the work, then you're right. I'm obsolete. Because AI can teach you everything that I'm teaching you, smarter, better, faster, and probably choose a prettier face to do it with. But this is the one I have, so I'm stuck with it. What AI can't do is care about you. AI has no compassion. AI can't give you a hug. Just this weekend, we have a new client. At one moment in our encounter, that person said, here's suicide, here's me, and here's normal life. I'm much closer to giving up than I am to moving forward. Over the course of a day, that same individual ran into somebody else. They spent a couple of hours together, just listening to each other, expressing their feelings and their thoughts. And this individual came back to me and said, I was so close to done, but I met this person and they told me all about the encounter and they told me all about the conversation, and then said, I'm ready to move forward. I need to dive into what you're doing because I think this Tory Power stuff is going to make a huge difference in my life. And I said, I agree that it will. What you just described to me is very similar to the process that we use, but it's also really digging into the humanity of who you are. And she said, I want to do this. And then when she told me who the person was, I was like, that doesn't surprise me at all. I've known that person for 10 years. And that's the kind of relationship we have. And it's the kind of relationship they have with other people. And I thought to myself, AI could have read your emotions. AI could have sensed from your facial expressions, from your tone of voice, from the pace, from the tenseness in your voice. Yes, AI pays attention to all of that stuff. Why do you think they study you for AI language models? It's not just asking about the words that you use. No, AI is studying everything about you, everything from the gestures to the congruence between your tone of voice and the words you're saying. AI is studying you. AI knows you probably better than you know yourself. Oh yeah, all those books and tips and tricks that I read on storytelling about how you can negotiate with anybody, how you can read anybody, how you can speak persuasively to anybody. All of those bits of information that I have studied to master communication, AI already has them. And it's already using them. Yeah, it's using them to read you. Which also means that its ability to utilize the algorithm based on your vocal tone, your pace, your pitch, your attitude, your word choices, the depth of your vocabulary, the expression of your intelligence, your EQ and your IQ, your education level, all of those things that a great communicator reads in the conversation and puts in the conversation intention delivery. AI can do all that. I get it. In that way, I can become obsolete. But you know what was really fascinating was at the end of the conference we were at, this person was walking out the door and saw my wife and I standing there and made a beeline out of the crowd. Didn't say 2 words, just walked over, gave us both a big giant hug and said thank you. That was it. AI can't do that. Never has, never will. Oh, they may create a robot that can mimic human emotion, that can read your emotions and respond to you in the way that it wants to. But if you ask yourself about programming and you ask yourself about manipulation and you ask yourself about a narcissist, my friend, an AI, that's about as narcissistic as it gets. That device has nothing in your interest, in its best interest. It's self-supporting. And I think the most frightening thing for me about AI is that you're right, it's smarter than me. It has access to more data than I have. It has more information, more knowledge than I have. It can read all the signs and all the data that's been put into it to make a determination based on all that it knows about your emotion. But it can't emote with you. It doesn't genuinely imagine, but it does create, kind of, from the sources of data that it has. Remember too, though, that AI was programmed. Yeah. It didn't think that stuff up on its own. Somebody told it what to think and how to think. And then the process took over by itself. I'm not saying AI is straight up evil. I have my own opinions of that, but I'm also not saying that I think AI is going to make humanity obsolete. I think that it is a tool. But I think if there ever comes a time that AI decides to take over the world a la Terminator, that we should probably find ways as leaders to not become obsolete. We should find ways to take deep advantage of the fact that we are humans and we have human interactions. Oh yeah, I know transhumans are coming. Transhumans have been around since before the days of Noah, by the way, in case you're curious about that. You might look up the word Nephilim and spend a little bit of time working on that. That would be a transhuman by definition, as would the human with the robot brain or the human soul inside it. Think RoboCop, transhuman. Yeah, it's not a new thing. It's been around for a long, long time. But from my religious perspective, from my faith perspective, God made man a little lower than the angels. In fact, it says, "What is man that thou wert mindful of him? The Son of Man that you would take thought of him." The God of the universe didn't create us to become obsolete. He created us as a treasure. Human beings. Now, we're going to go through a lot of weird phases, but we're not going to be obsolete. So the question you have to ask yourself is, in a relationship, as a leader, as an influencer, what knowledge base do you need to have? What skill set do you need to acquire? What mastery is important to you in what you do right now and what you might do in the future? If you, like my father-in-law, learned COBOL in the 80s, a database that most people can't even speak anymore. Most coding people don't know how to read and write the MS-DOS prompt, because they use an AI prompt, which they don't realize is about 15 layers of AI before they even ask the question. The ability to simply write your question in there, that's about 10 layers of code before you even start asking the question. All of that started with some very basic database content. But the guys who wrote that, today we look at them and we say you're obsolete because AI can do that so much faster. Not untrue, but you wouldn't be where you are without them. If you find yourself like that and you're asking yourself the question, well, now that I'm old, now that I've accomplished whatever I've accomplished, now that I've found myself competing with AI and robots and younger humans that can do the job faster and will do the job cheaper, how do I become indispensable? And I'm going to say to you, start writing. Start writing your books. Start writing your journals. Start recalling the things that, there's probably somebody around here who could answer the question, how do you move a 200-ton stone 1,000 miles? I don't know, maybe they're dead and gone already. But maybe that's knowledge that's hidden in the back of the mind of somebody that looks at a jar of pickles and goes, well, they didn't do that right. Because most of us think, like Miss Cortez, how do you ever run out of milk? You just go to the store and get more. It got to the store somehow. It came from a cow first. I mean, you hope it was a cow. Could have been a robot. I don't know. But if it came from a cow, somebody had to get it out of the cow and put it into a container and process it and put it into a bigger container and transport it and then put it in a smaller container to put it on a shelf for you to buy it. Milk doesn't come from grocery stores. That's just a delivery mechanism. AI may be found in your devices. That's not how it got there. No, it started in the heart and mind of a human first. Write down those things that you've learned. Don't let this lost knowledge impact happen. Oh, and for what it's worth, the biggest EMP in the world, the thing that everybody's trying to shield our power grids against, our AI against, our computers against. Did you know this? AI demands more power than the United States has ever produced. Yeah. When the whole world starts running on AI, we have a power generation problem. And the only way to generate enough power for that, the fossil fuels. What if you are the carbon they're trying to eliminate? What if you're the carbon they need for fossil fuel? That's a scary idea. What if AI can't run without you not running? What if the lost knowledge of how to move a 200-ton stone exists inside your mind and imagination? What if you don't write that down? Just some questions I want you to ponder. Are you obsolete? No, not yet. So long as you're living and breathing, there's something in you that nobody else has. It's only in you. How will you get it out? How will you apply it? How will you make it important to the world? That's the question you should be asking yourself. I'm J Loren Norris with Leading Leaders Podcast, or Tell It Like It Is TV. Have a blessed day.
Loren is a master teacher on storytelling, and I learned so much. I'm really going to have to sit down and go back through everything, and I think I might have to have some more coffees with Loren, but it was totally worth my time, and I really highly recommend it if you're looking to grow your ministry, grow your business, grow your career. Loren will serve you well.